All right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for our few-minute delay. My name is Caitlin Langer, and I am a community coordinator at eFolder and your host for today's event. Welcome to our eFolder Partner Chat series. This webinar series brings together leading eFolder partners for business-oriented discussions. Today's topic is how hiring a farmer can help your MSP business thrive. This is part 3 in a webinar series about MSP sales strategies. This series is designed to cover different aspects of the sales process and to provide MSPs with real partner experience regarding selling managed services. Today we are joined by eFolder partner Nathan Austin, Vice President of Business Development at MyTech Partners. Before we go through today's agenda, let's first cover a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded. The recorded version of the webinar will be made available on each eFolder's YouTube channel. We will also make copies of the slides available to those who registered for the event. With over 100 people registered for today's session, we have put all participants in listen-only mode. You can enjoy the audio portion of today's event by either streaming it on your computer or by dialing in over the phone. Questions are strongly encouraged throughout. We have planned a special Q&A section at the end of today's discussion, but you may submit your questions as we go along, and we will try to address them on the fly. Today's presentation follows a logical order. After introducing our partner guest, Nate Austin, we're going to do a quick overview of what exactly a farmer is. I will then have Nate share his experiences with relationship-based sales at MyTech Partners. We will talk a little bit about client retention strategy, upsell strategy, and how to effectively cultivate relationships before getting into how to design a motivating compensation plan. Finally, we will open up the floor to questions from everyone in the audience. Now let me introduce Nate. Nathan Austin specializes in managed services strategy and sales and has more than 15 years of experience with MyTech Partners. Nate is a partner and a VP of Business Development at MyTech. Nate, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Caitlin. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So Nathan, can you start and just tell us a little bit about MyTech Partners?
Absolutely, sure. Just to put it all in perspective, we started back in 2000. We have our 4 equal owners in the company that are all part of the business still today and are active in the business today. We started with just an office in the Twin Cities area, and over the last few years in particular, we've done an acquisition each year over the last few years. One of them in Minnesota, which we kept in our main office. Another one in southern Minnesota, which is accounted for the second office in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, about an hour south of the Twin Cities. And last year, it's actually this Friday, will be 1 year where we acquired an organization in Denver and now have an office there as well. So yeah, we started back in 2000, when businesses were just getting off of dial-up and trying to figure out, well, what is this network thing? What is a firewall? Why do you need that? You mean we can all be online at the same time? That's definitely where we started, and our world is dramatically different now. But yeah, our company, our primary business model, if you're familiar with service leadership at all, is we call the infrastructure managed services, where we do projects and managed services for our managed services customers. We rarely do projects outside of that scope, but we do have some criteria where we will engage that. Across the organization, across the locations, we have a couple 150 clients, and we don't have necessarily in particular vertical, but we have definitely over the years achieved concentration in medical and automotive, many nonprofits, as well as in the financial services, broker-dealer segments of the market. Finally, I would say that really over the last 3 or 4 years is when, as we embarked on a 10-year plan to be a $100 million organization in 10 years that started 3 years ago. We're in our 4th year of that plan, and which means that we needed to achieve 35% year-over-year growth to achieve that target. And we're into the 4th year, and so far we're on track. So over the last several years, we've been at or above 35% year-over-year growth. One of the reasons why I mention that is not from a feather in the cap perspective, but more to say that applying these principles has helped us achieve those growths in addition to acquisition. So it's been through acquisition, about 50% acquisition, 50% organic, that's enabled us to achieve those growth metrics. So that's why I mentioned that. So that's probably a good overview at the moment. Caitlin, unless there's anything else.
No, that was great. Thanks, Nate. So now we're going to get to the question in everyone's mind. What exactly is a farmer? So a farmer is a role where someone can cultivate and maintain relationships in order to develop opportunities to grow existing accounts. So based on that definition, a farmer is still very much an active member of a sales team. But how does a farmer differ from a hunter? Hunters are typically what you think of when you think of a traditional salesman type role. They tend to hunt down new prospects who have a need for their products or services and are willing and able to make a purchase now. Hunters enjoy spending time trying to close the deal and gain a new client. In comparison, though, the farmer's focus is to grow and maintain relationships with existing clients. They need to develop an in-depth understanding of the existing client's business in order to effectively identify solutions that fit well with the client's business strategy and needs. Both the hunter and the farmer roles, or a dual combination of both of these roles, which we'll talk about later in the webinar, are important for having a successful sales strategy. It is crucial to hunt down new business, but it is also important to farm and cultivate existing client relationships so that you do not lose the clients you work hard to gain. So a farmer's primary goal is to act like a business consultant for existing clients. Some goals of farmers or other account management-based roles are to be a sole point of contact for the client. You are the client's go-to person at your firm, and you are responsible for getting the client's needs addressed and taken care of, or steering them towards the right resource who can help them. Goal 2, drive upsells and cross-sells by maintaining relationships with existing accounts and identifying potential areas of growth in your services. And goal 3, ensure client retention. You want to make sure that you keep your existing clients happy so that you can maintain their business. Farmers need to provide excellent customer service and make sure clients' needs are taken care of in a timely fashion. So now that we know kind of the farming sales strategy, we're going to move into talking about how Nate and MyTech have kind of set up their sales team to provide relationship-based support to their existing client base. So Nate, I know you guys kind of had a psychology behind the way you initially set up MyTech's sales team. Can you kind of talk about this psychology and the 4 principles listed on the screen?
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. This is something that we've engaged with different sales coaches, and I've been fortunate to engage in peer groups like Heartland Technology Groups or HTG, and been exposed to sales mentors over the years. And all of them, and there's psychology. This isn't a MyTechism or a Nateism. This is really kind of what I've learned through sales coaches and mentorship, which there's 4 main reasons why people buy from you, from your organization. And especially when we're talking business to business, you know, consultative advisory sales, it's not something that's just transactional like buying something off of Amazon. It's because they're in this order, and psychology reinforces this. It's because the 4 reasons why they buy from you are because first, they like and trust the salesperson, and secondly, they like and trust the company as listed here. But part of the reason why they like and trust the company is because they believe the salesperson would choose to work for a quality company, and so you're receiving the benefit of the fact that they like and trust the salesperson. 3, it's about the solution, and 4, it comes down to price. Now, granted, some people might say exceptions are there, and that definitely is true. As far as we just lost a customer recently because it was all about price, and that's all they cared about. Didn't care about the relationship, didn't care about the history, just cared about price. So that does happen. It happens to everybody, but in general, this is the reason, especially if you're going after new prospects, why they buy. And we've built our entire sales strategy and sales team structure around this principle of human psychology.
Awesome, great. So can you kind of talk about how your sales team is organized and how you kind of did structure it around that psychology?
Yeah, thanks. And one of the things that, for those of you who are listening in now or in the future, we're definitely not trying to cover any of the arguments or the different philosophies in the industry that says, well, what is hunting versus farming, and should farming be a technical function or a sales function? Should you have hunters versus farmers versus a hybrid role? We're not going to be able to have time to cover all of that. And part of it, there's 2 points I'd like you to think about as we go through this next several slides. One of them is that I'm going to share what our experience has been and what we have found successful. So that's one. And two, that regardless of how you choose in your organization to fulfill these functions, they need to be fulfilled, right? So it's really about, you can choose how to structure your organization based on the unique skill sets of the people you have, but these functions need to be executed. And secondly, I'll share how we've structured it and how we've found success in our structure. So for what that's worth. So to answer your question, Caitlin, we've basically structured our team, our sales team, in a team-like structure. Part of this evolved because many of the people on the phone might be trying to hire that first salesperson, hire their first successful salesperson. We as salespeople, my business partner and I at the time, were the 2 outside salespeople, and what we weren't doing very well is we weren't doing a lot of the transactional components. So we were experiencing pain around not being timely about that PC purchase that a customer wants, or the firewall renewal that we needed to execute on, or the account management responsibilities of helping them budget and plan. We were mainly contacting our customers when they needed to spend money, and they didn't like that. So fortunately, we all learned through pain, it seems. So one of the things we realized, well, gosh, we need to bring on a resource to help us with all that stuff, but it's not necessarily it doesn't need to be a highly technical resource, in our opinion. It doesn't need to be a highly experienced resource, because some of the basic transactional items that need to be done, it can be just more of a supportive role. So we basically have evolved from that pain several years ago to, we have 2 outside sales reps to every 1 sales assistant. So across our organization, we have 8 outside sales reps, and we have 4 sales assistants that support 2 outside sales reps each. And the outside salespeople are the hunters, and you could consider, to some extent, the sales assistant more of the account manager, the account management role, a lot of the day-to-day transactional components. But yet, some of the farming, to the points that, Caitlin, you referenced in earlier slides, I do still hold the outside sales rep accountable for executing on business reviews and being that trusted advisor. So. And my goal, relative to those 4 reasons why people buy, is because the last thing that I want to do is take that relationship, that liking and trusting, that's the primary reason why people have chosen to do business with us, and rip that relationship out so that we can, put in just a farmer. So I held my salespeople to be hunters and farmers, but I put a supportive role underneath to help them with all the transactional components that can really enable them to spend their highest and best use of their time working with their customers. So that's probably a good overview of how we've gotten. I know we're going to touch on other points later, but that's kind of an overview of what our team structure looks like and how we got there.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Nate. So kind of moving on to kind of more specific roles. So the outside sales rep kind of is the main contact for your clients because that's who they, met initially through the sales process. And then at what point, and if any, do they come in contact with the sales assistant? And what kind of role does the sales assistant have, with communication with your client?
Yeah, great question. We do have the ultimate accountability lies with the outside sales rep. So, and the reason why I articulate it that way is because issues that do arise, whether they be simple questions, an invoice question, it could be a question on a PC, it could be a question on a service ticket, if they get to a certain point, they're going to escalate and ultimately hold the salesperson accountable for managing that relationship. But beyond that, the sales assistant really helps us, and I have documents Caitlin, if there's ever anyone who has said they're interested, where we actually define the sales assistant role in and the team structure in a very specific way, where the first and foremost, the sales assistant's job is really a customer service role. They need to respond to transactional requests in a 24 to 48 hour period as fast as possible. So we need those PC requests, questions that come in, those kind of things. The sales assistant also is responsible for making sure that our quarterly business reviews get scheduled. And the reason why I say they're the ones responsible for being scheduled is because I don't give my salespeople the option of not holding those meetings, whether it's an in-person meeting or a phone call. I hold assistants accountable for scheduling those. And then the sales assistants are also responsible for helping prepare all of the information, the inventory reports, the ticket summaries, any of that stuff that we've designated as part of our quarterly reviews with our customers. The sales assistants are responsible for preparing those things. I know as a salesperson, those are all the things that oftentimes are just for the back burner issues and were things that were not as transactional or urgent or fires. So having someone that's probably more detail oriented than a salesperson as well to prepare that information is the key transactions that they're responsible for doing. Those are the primary responsibilities. I have tertiary responsibilities that we've defined, such as they might help put quotes together, for example, if they need to go out to distributors and help with project quotes and help putting the quotes together. They're not responsible for driving the process, but they might help and aid the salesperson in putting together the quotes. So, and that's really how we've defined it, and we try and define it in a way that allows them to give pushback if they're not able to meet the primary metrics of a 24 to 40 hour response time and they're not able to get those quarterly business reviews scheduled and prepped. But other than that, it's whatever the team needs. That's the mindset that we try and have. It's to serve the customer and give the customer the best experience. The other question you asked, and this will be kind of one of the last points for this particular slide, is when do we introduce the sales assistant? At the absolute latest, we introduce the sales assistant after the prospect has become a customer, and we go into the account management, methodology and the quarterly reviews and things like that. But most often, we introduce them during the sales process as part of the introduction of the team that supports them and the team that will help make sure that we are meeting their needs from a business perspective. So that's usually it's earlier on in the sales process, as not all of our competitors have that defined structure that helps really meet and be responsive to the customer's needs.
Great, I like it. So kind of moving on, you mentioned in the previous slide about how the sales assistants are kind of responsible for scheduling quarterly reviews. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that actual quarterly business review meeting. So if you can kind of tell us a little bit about that and your sales reps' goals for those meetings and kind of the conversations that you're having with your clients for those.
Sure. Yeah, and this isn't anything that anyone on the call is probably. This is not some major revelation or eureka moment. This is pretty common best practices as far as executing on some sort of account management in a quarterly rhythm. And sometimes that's, depending on the size of the client, if they're a smaller client and they're not changing that much, sometimes it's just a quarterly check-in. Hey, is everything good? You've already had the conversations you need. Nothing's really changing. It's at least a check-in. For the larger clients, those quarterly meetings sometimes end up being weekly calls because there's enough going on with them, enough move ad changes, enough initiatives, projects, et cetera, going on in their world that the communication needs to be more frequent from an account management and advising perspective. So but minimally my expectation is for my team is that it's done on a quarterly basis to at least check in. So the key components of that, and when we look at how we operate and what our focus is that one of the biggest risks that presents themselves in any organization, and everyone on the call knows this, is asset management and lifecycle management. If they have a UPS whose battery is old or is out of warranty, or a server that's out of warranty, or old machines that are on XP still, or Server 2003 machines, like all those core basic infrastructure components that are old or that present a risk because of just their increased probability of failure, is really what we need to make sure is the primary, one of the primary functions of those quarterly reviews is really to make sure that there's nothing present in their infrastructure that could cause some major productivity outage. But quite frankly, that part of the conversation is really boring. Most CEOs, executives, CFOs, most don't like talking about that stuff. It's really boring. It's not exciting. Yeah, do you need more RAM? Do you need to buy a new PC? Like that's not really a business conversation. That's standard lifecycle management. So what our goal is, as far as what the sales assistants are to prepare for our quarterly business reviews, is making sure that we have an asset inventory, and we have a tool that we've developed because there's not really a tool that exists there's a couple tools actually that exist in the industry that do this that I'm aware of, but we, not one that did what we wanted to do. So we actually developed a tool, and this isn't about the tool, this is just about the concept of executing the meeting, is that tries to assess all of their assets that we need to be concerned about, from their software, servers, workstations, firewalls, laptops, UPSs, any of those components, and whether or not there's a renewal or a next action date as far as like a firewall renewal, a warranty renewal, a potential replacement date, all of those kind of things, so we can actually put a budget together. So that even if they're buying a server today, we may be budgeting 4 to 5 years from now a dollar amount to say, hey, we're going to put a placeholder and a dollar amount here, but knowing that 5 years from today, it's a good probability that might be a hosted environment as opposed to an OpEx instead of a CapEx expenditure. But the idea is we're having the conversation with our customers at that level so that hopefully we can capture it, document it, and then we can get beyond that conversation as quick as possible. It takes a couple times working through your customer to get that completed and get that point, but now you've got a couple things for you. One, you've already basically sold the customer on and gotten agreement and buy-in on when they will be replacing or when they're going to be budgeting replacing those assets. You've actually built a sales plan, so you already know revenue and projects that are coming inside of your customer base. And three, that now that you've got that out of the way, you can actually spend time and focus on the more important conversations that your salespeople or your VCIO, whatever you want to call it, your sales engineer, your project or long-term technology roadmap, you're having more strategic conversations about security, two-factor authentication, the fact that DPI SSL is going to be a thing now, HIPAA compliance, whatever kind of are they doing. There's a lot of acquisitions going on right now. We've seen in our customer base, like those kind of conversations, telecom optimization, all the things that really can start not just lifecycle managing, but actually that return investment to the organization, helping them move up the stack to work on efficiency and integration and better utilization of their tools, when I say tools, their line of business applications, so that they as an organization are increasing their level of maturity. Because if you can keep the focus and the conversation and provide value for your customer at that level and demonstrate that you can have earned a seat at the table because you can engage them at that level, then replacing a server or a PC or a firewall or a backup is really a non-issue. It's a necessity to facilitate the rest of the engagement. So it's one of the best sales tools we've experienced to make sure that we're engaging at the right level, we're getting the boring conversations out of the way as quickly as possible, and really helps retain the clients and keep them engaged with us as an organization, because we're adding value, not just because we can tell them to replace their PC or a server or a firewall, but because we're actually helping their business leverage technology at a higher level than they've been able to do in the past. So that's a good overview. I don't know, any thoughts or comments or questions, Caitlin, that you can think of?
No, that was great. So I guess depending on the client then, and how big they are and how much they're growing, maybe not every quarterly meeting might be that long of a conversation. I would imagine there's a range depending on client size and their needs, kind of like how that conversation goes.
Without a doubt, and not only that, that it's not that the same content is covered. Like, let's say if you have a client that's larger and you end up having a weekly or monthly engagement or conversation with them, you're not having the asset management conversation on every one of those calls, right? It might be more specific about a project, but the goal is that minimally on a quarterly basis, we at least touch in on what risks might have changed in the last quarter, because as time moves on, something that wasn't 5 years old, 2 quarters ago could now be 5 years old now, but you should have already had that planned. But yeah, you're correct. It depends on the amount of change going on in the organization, which is oftentimes a strong correlation to the size of the organization that you're working with. And one other thought that you mentioned earlier that on this slide that I wanted to touch on too is about like the title slide of this slide is the upsell strategy. This is also our best opportunity to make sure that we're able to incrementally communicate, changes, because hopefully we as technologists and working as consultants and business advisors and supporting their technology, if there's one thing that's constant in our industry is change as well. So we as businesses are growing and maturing and adding services and adding value or having new services that we're bringing to the table that might apply to them, making sure that this is also a conduit for not just having business conversations with the customer, but trying to connect the dots to here are new things that we're doing, here's additional stuff that we can provide for you, that's your value that we're delivering, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big part of not only the retention, but also the upsell strategy, as well as having those quarterly meetings.
Awesome, great. And that was the perfect lead-in for our next topic, which is more kind of the client retention strategy. So kind of going off of what we just talked about, providing your clients with those quarterly reviews and, discussing risk management and all that. What is your client feedback from those meetings? Do they appreciate it? Do they understand it? Do they, do you think that plays a part in their retention and happiness with your services?
Yeah, thank you. It does. It definitely provides a part of the retention, but it's definitely multifaceted, right? Where one of the things that we've talked about as an organization is how when you get like customer satisfaction surveys, for example. So what we actually use a tool, it's a great tool. It's next.to, nex.to. They're based out of the UK, and it integrates with our ticketing system, ConnectWise. And so on every single service ticket that we deliver, whether it's project or service or other areas, anything on the service side of our business, we actually send out a very simple client satisfaction survey that says, hey, was this a positive experience? So it's a green smiley face. Was it a neutral experience? It's a yellow kind of neutral. Or is it a negative experience and it's a red like frown face? So it gives a very quick feedback where they can one click give us feedback, and then when they do that, they have the option of actually putting comments in. So I'm articulating this because this is mainly on the service side, and don't be confused with individual customer satisfaction responses at this level to overall client satisfaction with the business relationship between you and your customer. Hopefully that's a good indicator of whether or not your service team is delivering a good experience to them, but that's by no means saying that, for instance, if you asked them that promoter score question, would they recommend you to a friend or colleague? So there's correlation there, but not necessarily, or there's inputs to that, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that outcome. So we actually distinguish between the customer service side on the service delivery and the customer satisfaction surveys that we deliver there, and then part of our quarterly review process, we actually have our sales assistants reach out and put together and ask the question, do a net promoter score question. We just ask that question because that's more of an overall relationship of the business, so that our customers answer that question, and if there's anything less than a promoter, which is, I don't have the metrics off the top of my head, you can look it up, Google it, but it's usually a 9 or 10. Anything less than a 9 or 10 is either neutral or a detractor. So using that as an opportunity to reach out, as well as we also ask them, was this meeting valuable, or what could we do to make this meeting more valuable to you, so we can try and elicit some feedback as far as incrementally improving our quarterly review process. So, and that's a big part of just making sure that they see us asking and actually evolving and changing and adapting and responding to their feedback. So that's from that kind of first bullet point that you have here on the customer service side, making sure that we do that. The other comment I would say that, and I'm sure as many of you have grown, that service escalation, so if a client has a question about service, one of the things that we learned is that because the primary relationship is with the salesperson, oftentimes, and that's who they know and that's been designated as their primary point of contact, that the customer automatically then goes to the salesperson. So now you have your salespeople getting involved in day-to-day service tickets or getting back to customers or answering questions because we never really fostered or developed a method where someone on the service side would actually have and foster, and it was part of their role to build a relationship with the clients. So once we got to a certain size where it made sense, we actually broke our service team, our help desk service team, into teams, and we have a service coordinator on each team, and we have level 1, 2, and 3 engineers on each team, and the service coordinator is tasked with not only coordinating the service tickets for the customers they support, but as well as trying to be that foster and build a relationship on the service side, because it does a couple things. One, customers feel better that they have a resource that they can go to help escalate or poke if it needs to be poked or something needs to be handled slightly differently or more urgently. It also takes a burden off your sales team so they can focus on selling and account management and upselling as opposed to getting involved in service related issues. So it's had a kind of a two-handed approach as far as delivering on a customer service perspective. The last point on that first bullet that you mentioned is sales go hand in hand with technical infrastructure. This also gets into the blue review and the quarterly review process, which is also the reference on the last bullet point here, which is have standards, and you probably already have them, at least the way you're designing your networks or the way your organization has evolved, but working to document them and hold your customers accountable to maintaining their networks inside of those standards. Because one of the best things the sales team can do to help the technical team is to make sure that customers are replacing things when they should, they are renewing warranties and security subscription when they need to, they are updating their backup when it's appropriate, to make sure that we're supporting technology that's A, within the confines of the training and expertise of our service delivery team, but B, within the supportable lifespan of that technology as indicated by the manufacturer. So that's a big part of what sales and that upsell strategy should be, and the client retention strategy is if we can do a better job of keeping them happy because they've got good technology that stays up more, then that's where sales and service very much complement each other. So yeah, that's probably covered most of that there with regard to how the relationship and what the things they should be doing from a customer service perspective, and touched on asset managing. The blue review process is that's our quarterly reviews. We're referencing quarterly reviews because that's what the industry calls them, but we call it our blue review process because we call our standard our blue standard. So we've defined, our standards and call it the blue standard and try and help train our team and advise our customers to align their infrastructure to those standards.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. You really covered everything in great detail, so thank you. Before we move on, I just want to remind everyone on the line that if you have any questions, feel free to send in your questions, and we will try to get them answered as we move along throughout the webinar. Okay, so Nate, moving on to the next slide. So I know that MyTech has, I think we discussed this in a phone call earlier, that you have an onboarding project manager whose job it is to kind of get the ball rolling on setting up the services and implementing technology for new clients. But how does your sales rep kind of play a role in facilitating and initiating that process with your client?
Yeah, thank you. So this is many of you probably already have project handoff meetings where there's a project that the customer has approved, and so you have an internal kind of project handoff meeting, and then you execute on the project. This component with onboarding is very similar to that, except for managed services. And it's really about setting expectations. It's reinforcing the communication that should have already happened with the salesperson, so that the customers don't presume that the customers know how to do service with you. For instance, many of us have plans and some of the nuances of those plans. So one of the things that we cover, and we've grown to cover because this has bitten us, and imagine it's probably bitten many of you too, is most of our customers have a 8 to 5 or a business hours plan where our support is covered during business hours, and after hours it's really for them to escalate to us. However, one of the analogies that we use when we talk to our customers is, I buy a sump pump in my house if I need one because I want the water. I don't want to have a flood in my basement, so I have to buy a sump pump to make sure that the water gets out. I also want an alarm on that sump pump so that it tells me when the sump pump stops working so that I can avoid having a flood in my basement. But if the sump pump alerts and no one does anything about it because it alerts and I know that I'm getting flooded but no one takes action, and so I get into my house and I walk into my basement and now I've got a flooded basement, I'm going to be really upset. So drawing this correlation to our customers, if they have an after-hours alert or emergency where their servers go offline, they have a power outage, storm rolls through, whatever those things are, very often customers don't want to walk in the first day or the next day, the next morning to find their infrastructure down. So we actually ask the question to our customers, because some of our, for any of our customers who that's not after-hour support is not included in their plan, we say, all right, well, what do you want us to do in the event that we receive an after-hours alert? Do you want us to alert you, and then you let us know if you want us to take action, or do you want us to take action and then know that you're going to be billed for it because you're pre-authorizing us to take action? So those are some of the nuances where if you haven't had that clarity with the customer up front, and then a year down the road they have an outage and you didn't clarify that point and they had the expectation that you were going to take action and you didn't, it's going to create some pain. So part of that onboarding process and making sure that not only has the salesperson articulated those things to the customer, but are we asking the right questions and getting the right answers, or at least getting answers at all, or having the conversation with the customer to set their expectation as far as how do you engage with service, what expectations do you have of us based on the plan to which you're subscribing, and just making sure that whatever training is needed based on your primary contact, sometimes the train the trainer, where you just you engage with the primary contact and teach them, and then it's their obligation and responsibility to train their team, or giving them the opportunity to bring their team in for a team training where we can go over all those details with their entire team. So it's very often a handoff between the salesperson and the onboarding project manager to execute on that communication, to hopefully to set up our relationship up for success, the customer's expectations to align with our ability to deliver, so that we can avoid that kind of future pain. Is that everything you were thinking of, Caitlin?
Yeah, yes, that was great. And just a quick question, what is a typical time frame, or how long does your onboarding process usually last?
That's a great question. And we actually have an onboarding process that if anyone is interested, I'd be happy to share. But basically we tell our team, our sales team, that to make sure that we have the time to not only do all of the deployment of our agents and the documentation and the have these conversations, that we need a minimum of 2 weeks. So our cutoff is to get service started on the 1st of the month. Our cutoff is the 15th of the month. If we don't have a signed agreement by the 15th, then we're not going to be able to hit. So we need a 2-week window is really what we ask. Sometimes, just to be candid and transparent, that we may be able to execute on all of the technical components, such as deploying our agents and our antivirus and getting the documentation done, but because of the ebb and flow of depending on how many customers we may be onboarding at that time, and or renewing, because we actually take our renewal, like if we have a customer that's renewing an agreement, we also take them through an onboarding, because chances are from the last time they signed an agreement to the current to now signing an agreement, things in our organization have changed and those expectations have probably changed. So we want to take that as an opportunity to re-engage and reset, especially because oftentimes there's employee turnover on the customer side that we need to make sure that we're able to have that communication. So depending on the volume of renewal onboardings and new onboardings, it sometimes takes longer than 2 weeks, but our goal and our expectation that we set is a 2-week window.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Nate. Okay, so moving on to compensation plans. So the way you kind of set up your sales team kind of as a hybrid role for hunters and farmers, they're getting new business but taking care of existing client accounts as well. How do you design your compensation for those reps?
I know, Caitlin, as we discussed, this opened up big forms and a lot of questions, and we could have a whole nother session just on this. But to keep it at a high level, I think there's a few things that I would want to make sure people kind of take with them, is that the sales assistant role is a straight hourly role. It is they're expected to work 8 to 5, and they punch a clock. They do share in annual team bonuses if the team exceeds 100% of their target. So they do participate in that, but they do not participate in any type of commission sharing or anything from a commission perspective. So they are eligible for team bonuses, but they do not get commissions, if that delineation makes sense. For our outside team, we have a strong belief, and this isn't just, again, this is psychology, not necessarily a MyTechism or a Nateism. It's compensation drives behavior. So we comp a low base salary, and I'd be happy to share. I won't get into the details of exactly what that is, but we have a low base salary where 75% or more of the compensation is intended to be commission-based. We pay them a percentage of gross margin based on services gross margin, managed services gross margin, and hardware and software gross margin. We do not pay on revenue. I don't care about revenue. I remember when I was a sales guy, when I was selling, and we were just kind of using opportunities and getting better about looking at our revenue, and we were looking at revenue, not gross margin. And I remember I had a referral that came in to sell a SAN. And it was like a $75,000 SAN. I was so excited as a sales rep, but because of it being a competitive deal and the customer doing a lot of price shopping, I only got about $1,500 margin on it. So, or $1,000, something like that, something that was very insignificant. So I was excited about the $75,000 opportunity, but in reality, it was only about $1,000 of value to the business. So that's where that we definitely have learned to gross margin drives all of our businesses, and making sure that we comp based on that. So the other component of that, because I do expect, I want to also compensate, again, what I expect my reps to deliver and execute. So because I hold them, it's a hybrid role, and I hold them accountable to the customer relationship, and for having those quarterly review meetings, and for dealing with service escalations and any kind of escalations that need to go to the relationship, I compensate them on our recurring income. So if they're managing a book of business of $100,000 a month, which is one of my top reps is actually managing that book of business today, he has a $3 million total book of business, and $100,000 of that's recurring a month. And I compensate him on all of it, every single dollar from every customer that he is assigned to manage. That's how he gets paid, because I hold him accountable for that. So I also compensate, and we give bonuses in addition to commission on managed services signing. So when they sign a new customer, as well as upon renewals. So I actually do pay that as well. So and again, I have documents and templates and spreadsheets and that I'd happy to share that we've used that have been very helpful to us in planning and forecasting and walking our salespeople through that and understanding what our cost structure is relative to our revenue and margin performance. But it's important that we pay on gross margin is the biggest component there. So I'm happy to share any of that if people show interest, Caitlin.
Okay, great. I'm just going to check and see if we have any questions regarding that while we're on this slide. Okay, great. I think you did a great job of covering that, because I know we talked about how it can get a little complicated, so I think you answered that simply. Hang on. I have someone asking a question. If the gross margin is net of the tech salaries or just the services?
That's a great question. So we actually, one of the things that is difficult from a sales perspective is to manage the cost on the service delivery side. The salespeople have no influence and no ability to impact that, as long as you don't allow them to sell at a rate right? They shouldn't be dictating what your managed services prices are, and they shouldn't be dictating what your professional services for projects are. So as long as they're adhering to those standards from your perspective and what your organization feels is appropriate, then they're not in a position to have an impact on how efficient you are on a service delivery side. So instead of trying to also layer in the extra tracking and logistical burden on you from a commission tracking perspective of saying, hey, this managed services client is only 40% profitable versus 50% profitable or 60% profitable, or any given project being profitable or not from whether or not they're hitting your targets. We actually do an artificial load. So all of our services, we load at 50% cost to account for labor, and our managed services, we load at 50% cost to account for labor and the tool costs, like backup software, for instance, through eFolder that we use, and the offsite backup costs that we actually send our data off to eFolder, for an example. So all of those costs that we incur as an organization are loaded at 50% as far as when we pay commission. So that way the rep doesn't have to be concerned about or get in your business about whether or not the project team or the managed services team is being efficient. That's your job as on the service side to manage your team to make sure you're hitting those margins. That's also something that we said in our comp plan that we reserve the right to change. So for instance, if something changes in our industry or our business where we're no longer able to meet that 50% and we need to adjust that one way or the other, we have the liberty to adjust that, and then we pay commissions as a percentage of that load, if that makes sense. So that's how we do it. It keeps it simple for the reps. It keeps it simple from a commission tracking perspective so that you're not trying to do all audits against all managed services customers and all projects in order to calculate that stuff. I hope that answered that question.
I think it did. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so compensation, and then kind of your hiring criteria for when you are hiring people for your sales organization. I know you kind of had some three kind of points that you had stressed to me before. If you could just kind of go over what you consider to be good factors for a successful sales role.
Yeah, this is definitely is another one of those topics that can warrant plenty more time than what we have. But from a high-level perspective, really sales is about building relationships. And one of the things that is also important to realize is that building relationships is not an external function only. It doesn't just apply to getting new customers and keeping customers. It also applies to vendors, and it also applies to internal staff and the service team, the project team, everybody. So that's really what a positive sign of seeing evidence of that in a person's, not only are they able to do that with you through the hiring process or whether you know them in the industry or something like that, but have they demonstrated or can they give examples of their ability to build relationships and how they've done that in their past. And being able for them to give examples of that, I think, is really a key thing to look for, because sometimes in an interview they can fake it long enough through an interview process, but trying to look for them being able to articulate examples of how they've done that is definitely a key thing that I look for. One of the other key components that I feel, and that's something that's hard to teach, is the relationship side, because that's more of their personality and how they engage people. You can coach that a little bit, but in general that's an innate trait that they either have or don't have. Business savvy is also something that we look for, and so several of my sales reps, a few of them have actually owned their own business in the past. A couple of them have actually led, have been like GMs of organizations, and definitely have some business exposure. So they understand the P&L. They can speak some basic financial language. They have a strong numerical reasoning, as one of my colleagues, Jonathan Worry at Marco, likes to call it. They should be able to understand and calculate percentages and those kind of things. But being able to understand business concepts and being professional enough to earn a right to sit at a table with the CFO or a president or an owner or director of IT, et cetera, it's important that they have some business savvy. And that's definitely something you can teach and improve their aptitude, but it's good if you can find that out of the gate as well. Finally, the last part that I really look for is not necessarily that they have a strong technical background or foundation, but that they have demonstrated an aptitude to be able to learn it. And this, for me, is the longest lead time for a salesperson, is to be able to understand the technology to a point where they can have a business conversation and they can connect the dots to a business pain that's being articulated and a solution that we have that can help them solve that problem. That is probably one of the most difficult things in our industry to do, because for one, our industries are just very complex, and two, once they learn it, it probably changes. So it just takes time. And so, but I look for that aptitude in a rep, that they can demonstrate their ability to learn and their interest in being able to learn, and that they're not, in particular, that they're not afraid of technology. Because if they express that they're afraid of it, then it's going to be very difficult for them to be successful in our industry from a sales perspective.
Yeah, if they're afraid of it, they're probably in the in the wrong industry.
Right, exactly. You'd be surprised, people are trying to get a job, right? And they might say, yeah, I don't like technology, I don't even use a smartphone, or, there's things that are indicators for them to say that they're probably not going to be a good, they're not going to dive in as far as learning technology if they, some indicators that they might suggest. So, yeah.
Right, might not be the best fit. Great, awesome. So I have a few questions that I wanted to move into before we open up the floor to all the other questions kind of in our question log. So I just want to encourage everyone once again, if you have any questions from any of the content that we've covered so far in the webinar, please send those in and we'll try and address them at the towards the end of the webinar. So Nate, my kind of first question for you, how do your sales, outside sales reps balance hunting new sales while maintaining current accounts? I know they get new client bonus when they sign new deals, and they get compensated on the accounts they are managing, but kind of how do they balance the two of those roles?
Yeah, so that is a phenomenal question, and that is something that where the coaching that I give to my sales team is that there is a best-in-class. So we use a financial benchmarking service called Service Leadership. Many of you probably already heard that because eFolder is definitely invested in the partner community, and I know that they are aware of Service Leadership. And Service Leadership does some financial benchmarking on best-in-class performance of a sales rep. And for our business model, if you do infrastructure and managed services, where more than, say, 10% of your revenue is managed services revenue, we've got our revenue is somewhere between 40 and 50% of our total revenue is managed services, and the other 50 to 60% is project services and hardware software resale. So if your product mix is and your revenue mix is somewhere in that ballpark, for us, that is it's a rep attaining. If you can translate that down to what does that translate to as far as best-in-class performance for a rep, and that's $2.5 million of total book of business that they're managing on a year-to-year basis. So to answer the question as far as how do they balance that, is that it's a sliding scale. Because in the beginning, as they're building their book of business, the majority of the time they're spending is going to be hunting, right? And as they approach over years of time, it took one of my reps 4 years, including giving him some customers from acquisitions, 4 years to get to the best from zero to best in class. And where he's managing, like I said, the $3 million book of business, the example I gave earlier. So his time now is primarily 100% managing his existing book of business and driving projects and maintaining customers and growing and retaining customers is his book of business. And for him to hunt, he is only going to hunt very specific clients that are larger than his smallest clients. He's not going to bring on clients that are smaller than his smallest clients. That's a waste of his time, and it's a waste of, they can provide more value to them and the organization by that. So really, it's short answer is it's a sliding scale depending on their total book of business. But for us, that's as they approach the $2.5 million annual total revenue mark, which nets around $950,000 of gross margin annually, is when they're definitely going to be more farming account managing than they are going to be hunting. So that's my probably best way of answering that question.
Okay, thanks. And then kind of related, do the members of your sales team, do they have a quota that they also get comped on for, upsells or cross-sells of services?
That's a great question. So we do have a goal, a gross margin goal on a monthly basis, as well as a net gross increase of managed services. And the fully ramped goal for my reps is $32,000 of gross margin per month, and we target around $1,000 to $1,200 of managed services increase on that. And that typically ramps from, if they're a very experienced person when they come on board, they might ramp to that level inside of a year. If they're a less experienced person, they come on pretty green, it might take them 3 years to ramp to that level. So but yes, the goal that I have across all my fully ramped salespeople is $32K of gross margin attainment per month. And that's net new opportunities, not invoice dollars. That's net new, and I mean net new opportunities could mean opportunities from existing customers as well as opportunities from new customers. It's projects, new scope projects, new managed services business or additional managed services business that's measured by.
Great. And then one final question. How do you ensure successful collaboration between your outside sales reps and the sales assistants?
Really, it's because it's such an important role. I mean, it's really the sales team, in order for me to have them focus on the things that are, A, drive the most commission for them, as well as drive the most value for our organization and deliver the best service experience to our customers, is that they need the sales assistants to handle all that stuff in the background. But the one thing that we make sure and we encourage is why we have the sales assistant, and why we call it an assistant, is because they need to make sure that whatever transactions they're doing are also in alignment with what's going on with the customer. Like if there's an opportunity to get a new, like the customer needs a new firewall, then the sales assistant needs to check with the salesperson when they're renewing a subscription, because it might be time to get a new firewall as opposed to renew that subscription for another year. So there is collaboration to make sure that the things, that the transactional components that the sales assistant is doing are in alignment with the overall vision and plan that again is held from an accountability perspective at the sales rep. Because customers will hear about it from our customers if we don't. Is really the pressure, that is natural pressure that exists there.
Right, that makes sense. Great, I know we're at the top of the hour. I just have one more question that we're going to ask from a listener. He is wondering kind of where you found to be the best sources for recruiting or hiring sales reps.
Yeah, that's another phenomenal question. Where I found success is really in relationships that I've built over the years. I know that's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but it's been through one of the sales reps that brought on recently last year. He came from one of our competitors that we actually, we lost a customer to them years ago when I was a sales rep. I got to know him and hit the way, just the professionalism, the way he handled that. I just kept in touch with him over the years, and when I was looking for a new rep, I reached out to him and, you know, worked on building a deeper relationship over about a 6-month period of time before he came on board. So it's really been a lot of relationships and having engagements in the industry. I'm going to be on the search for other reps here in the near future in Colorado, for example, and even a sales manager in Minnesota. But quite frankly, I'm not sure where I'm going to find those folks. It might even be from a recruiter. But so far, the people that we've found have been through relationships that have been established in the market and in the industry.
Okay, well, I guess that's a good sign, because that was your criteria. Part of your hiring criteria was relationship builder. So I guess that's a real life example of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are at the top of the hour. I don't want to take up much more of anyone else's time. So this kind of wraps up the webinar for today. Nate, thank you so much for tuning in and providing your real experience with MyTech. Everyone else on the line, today's webinar was recorded, so I will be sending a copy of the recorded webinar and the slides out to everyone who registered today. And Nate, if it's okay with you, I know you had shared those onboarding documents and kind of your sales compensation plan. If I share that with people who reach out to me for it, would that be okay with you?
Yep, absolutely. And if there's anything that they ask for, like the sales assistant document, I think there's stuff that we talked about that I definitely haven't shared, but if anyone asks, I'll share anything that we've got.
Great. So anyone on the line, you feel free to email me after the webinar and I can send you those documents, or get in touch with Nate to be able to share those with you. So thank you, everyone, and thanks again to Nate, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.